Hey, this is Les from the TV Dudes. This week, I have an interview that I am so excited about. It's been months in the making, and I finally can release it. I was lucky enough to sit down and chat with several of the writers and the showrunners of the new Netflix series, The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, which I just binge-watched over the weekend because I love puppets and The Dark Crystal. And also because I knew I would be chatting with these folks just as soon as we could talk about it. We sit down with writer and co-executive producer Javier Grillo-Maruach, showrunners Will Matthews and Jeff Addiss, writer and co-producer Vivian Lee, and writer Margaret Dunlap. It's a really great chat, and I hope you enjoy.
Before we start, who is on? Just so I know.
Sure.
Who's here.
So we're lucky enough to have
Javier Grillo-Maruach. I was a co-executive producer and writer on the show.
Will Matthews. I developed the show with Jeff and co-EP'd as well.
Jeff Addiss developed the show with Will Matthews and co-EP'd.
Margaret Dunlap. I was a writer on the show. Vivian Lee, co-producer, writer.
Nice. Okay, great.
Hi, Jeff.
And I am...
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Now you have to guess whether that was Vivian or Margaret.
That was Margaret.
I think we know.
And I've met Javi, Vivian, and Margaret before, but Jeff and Will, I'm Les. We've talked over email. It's so good to finally talk to you on the phone. I just got to binge watch roughly 10 hours of Dark Crystal, which was an absolute blast. I can't believe how good that series is, honestly. So let's we'll dive right in. Can you all talk a little bit about your role on the show and your connection to the original material when you saw the original movie?
This is Jeff. I guess I'll start. Will and I came on board. I think the story has been well reported that we had a pitch for Labyrinth 2, but they were not doing that. But they were like, hey, we're doing Dark Crystal. So Will and I, it was just fortuitous. It was luck. It was the universe. We came in and we pitched our little hearts out, and we got the job and sold the show to Netflix. We wrote a pilot and test as well that we shot, like a 5-minute test. And then off of that, we got the green light. We had an idea of the show. I think maybe we had a story document, but that was when Javi came in because we had never run a room much or even been in one. Will, do you want to talk about it from there?
Yeah, then Javi came in, and it all went downhill. And
Oh, horrible. It was horrible. No, really. I mean...
Figure out, this guy comes in, and he's got Emmys, he's got Golden Globes, and he's got a lot of opinions. And so, there's a lot of times, most of the time, when someone comes in to quote-unquote help, it goes badly. It goes sometimes very badly. And Jeff and I were just so lucky that this sweetheart of a genius writer walked through the door and said, guys, it's going to be fine. And he really...
Wow.
Don't interrupt me again, I swear to God.
Sorry. I swear to God.
And Javi taught us so much and never drew attention to the fact that he was teaching us. And that's so rare. It really is in the ethos of the Jim Henson world. It's in the ethos of Thra and Gelfling coming together for the greater good. And the writer's room was a great example of everyone rowing in the same direction, working to make each story better. And so while Jeff and I had the big beats for most of the episodes, everyone fleshed them out, made them better, added to it, and the show really grew from what we had originally envisioned.
Okay, can I talk now?
Just this once.
Let's see how it goes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, you can tell. Well, you can tell me to shut up because I know I go on. Will and Jeff. I mean, they're as you can see, they're extraordinarily gracious about my contribution to this. And one of the things that we that attracted me to the project was the kind of blueprint that they had already created for the season, which actually became a 2-season blueprint, because really they had so much story there, and we needed to kind of decompress it and talk about the and spend a little bit more time with the characters and so forth. But really, Will and Jeff had answers to questions that were extraordinarily important to whether to do this. They had written a wonderful pilot. And one of the things, it was just a real pleasure to be able to get involved with a show where I didn't have to worry about whether the creators had a real vision or not. Sometimes you go into a show and the creators are like, well, you worked on Lost, you tell us what our vision is. So just to work with people who are so self-assured and so completely sort of knowledgeable of what they wanted out of this was just a real breath of fresh air for me.
Vivian, Margaret?
I guess I could jump in. It's so funny when you, in hindsight, how things were meant to be. I had just signed with a new agency, and the agency gave me kind of like a questionnaire of like what your likes are, what your dislikes are, big dreams when it comes to what kind of shows you like, all that stuff. And under my likes, I had just randomly put down, not randomly, but I put down I love puppets, just because I did. And literally the next day after I filled out that questionnaire, my agents went, so we see that you like puppets. Henson is going to do a project. We can't tell you what it is, but would you be interested in going and meeting with the writers? And I was like, yeah, of course. It's Jim Henson. Are you kidding me? It's the Henson Company. And when I went and met with, I think it was Will, Jeff, Javi, Louis might have been there, Blanca might have been there too. I think so. And I remember them telling me it was a Dark Crystal, and I was so, I think the whole time, first off, I fell in love with the guys because they were just so fun, and they were so lovely, and they're all so smart, that I remember walking away from that meeting going, man, if I can work with these people, working on such a great project, I'd be living my dream. And I am, luckily they chose me and I got to write for them. So it was amazing. Margaret, your turn.
My turn. Yeah, well, it's fitting because I do feel like I was sort of the last one aboard. Not only the last one aboard, the boat had sort of left the dock, and there was Javi standing at the stern of the ship throwing me a rope saying, hey, we're going to get you on this. I had worked with Javi before on The Middleman and Day One, and I'd known him for years before that, and sort of been in similar to Vivian doing the meeting of, we can't tell you what it is, but it's a Legacy Henson project. And I remember talking to my manager, and we're like, it's Dark Crystal. It's got to be Dark Crystal, right? And then you walk into a room with like 5 people. I remember sitting at the end of the table sort of staring down like, you may be wondering why I asked you all here. But everybody was just so delightful, and being able to come in and be a part of it. Like I always feel like, I snuck aboard and somebody is going to figure out that I stowed away and kick me off the boat at some point.
Silence, because we obviously all agree.
Yes, exactly. It's like, when were we going to tell her? Yeah.
No, she was the Jack to our Titanic. We're constantly trying. Yeah.
I'm just scared shitless of the crosstalk, and I don't want to interrupt anybody. So I'm just
right?
Wait till I'm just gonna wait till somebody says Javi.
And Javi.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I heard that there was going to be a prequel or any furthering of the Dark Crystal, in my mind it was kind of this perfect contained movie from my childhood, and I had not realized the development process, that there had almost been some sequels and other things done with it, and there's a manga and Jolie's books, and I wasn't aware of some of the expanded universe. Going into this much mythology, how much, Will and Jeff, how much were y'all aware of the expanded universe of Dark Crystal already, and where did you start to set the boundaries of where you wanted to place this? Making a prequel can always be so strange to have it dovetail to older material. We watched Star Wars deal with this. Where did you kind of, it's not a fully blank canvas, so where did you kind of choose to set your story?
Well, one of the fun things about having a partnership is that you can have 2 different perspectives. So Jeff knew everything about the Dark Crystal intuitively. he loved it so much growing up. I loved it too, but he loved it so much growing up that he just knew it in his bones, whereas I had to learn it. So you have two ways of knowing the world then. Jeff knows it intuitively, and I read everything and studied everything and knew everything that way. So that means that all of those pieces were very fresh for me. So the mandate from Henson was all of the material, and there was a lot over that time, had to talk to each other, had to sort of be of a piece. And putting those pieces together was challenging, but was a lot of fun. So yes, there was a lot on the canvas already, and then we added to it.
Hey, this is Javi. I think that, one of the things that, and again, it's sort of part of my endless praise for Will and Jeff, is that, like the Star Wars universe where they decommission certain pieces of canon at will, depending on what they want, or that George Lucas always said that whatever he said was canon, but everything else was sort of at sort of less and less important orbits of canon. The Henson Company didn't have that kind of flexibility with it. They wanted everything to be part of a greater whole. And I think like what Will and Jeff were able to do is crack that code. It was literally take all these disparate pieces of mythology that are laying around and figure out a great story to tell with it. And honestly, that's one of the things that attracted me most about the project was just that. I mean, I had an idea of how much Dark Crystal material was out there. I didn't know that the Henson Company was as hell-bent in keeping everything within canon as they were. And once I kind of understood the parameters under which the pilot had been written, it's tremendously impressive, because you're also working toward a lot of people have seen the film and believe that they understand exactly how everything ends, which I would say don't make any assumptions about that. But, there's a fairly epic event that happens sometime between our show and the movie. And I think for these guys to have come up with an answer that is dramatically valid and that we can write towards, I think that's the real magic here. It's being able to look at the canon, conform the canon, and then work within the canon to create something new. It's a really big accomplishment for these guys.
Yeah, I found when I was watching it, there were various points where I started to realize exactly where we were sitting within the mythology that I already knew, and there's kind of a great sadness that comes over partway through the series when you realize that in the trine between this series and the next, these Gelfling all come to a bad end. We don't
know that. No, Thra's a big place. A lot of room for hope, right, guys? Talk about this, guys.
All right. I like where you're going there. I like that, Jen, that this may be an ignorance problem and not actually him being the last. Because you're right. You come away feeling like it's entirely sewn up in your head sometimes that I know where it all goes. And I was really thrilled to feel like at the end of y'all's series that there could be another season of this, that this isn't, there could easily, I desperately want to see Gartham Wars now. I want to see what happens next. You made 10 hours of movie that somehow expanded. I now want to know more than I wanted to know after just a 2-hour movie, and not in an infuriating way. It's truly a pretty magical trick. When you were setting up something so far in advance as writers, knowing that, this isn't a television show on a tight production schedule where you turn the script in and actors immediately are reading these lines. You wrote this thing and then puppeteers are going to do it for a year. Were there any special considerations or particular headaches to knowing that you kind of had to sew it all up and then hand it over?
This is Jeff. I was on set for the entire shoot and through post-production. So when we came out of that room, we had 10 scripts. And they were good scripts, and we believed in them. But there was opportunities. Will and I were on the whole time. Will was writing from L.A. I was in London. We were always able to flesh out and always able to adjust and always able to learn lessons. So I don't think there's a single scene we shot that isn't in the show because we got so good at it, but it was a constantly evolving conversation with Louis. Of what do we need, what holes do we need to fill, what's a better way of doing something. But really it was always the story when we came out of that room. We had 10 scripts. So it wasn't about how do we make it different or better. It was just about how do we adjust to the realities of production and the story as it unfolds and you start to see it. I mean, we were very lucky to have one person directing all 10 and literally operating the camera and literally just doing crazy hours. We would be the last two people at the studio, and I would leave at 10:30, and he would still be working, and he would make fun of me for leaving. And I was like, you got to sleep at some point, man. But the lesson of Louis is apparently you don't. So it was able to evolve and change and adjust, but really that was about the realities of production and finding moments that we felt like we needed to ease the audience into deep in episode 2. So there was like a new scene that we wrote there, or just finding these moments as they revealed themselves.
We were working in pre-production while we were writing, so a lot of the designs were informed by what we were doing. We were informed by them and all of that. And of course, having Jeff and Will continue to work on the show through production, and having Louis there the entire time, both in writing and production, kind of made everything very integrated. But I'm curious, for Margaret and Vivian, who you guys actually, wrote your scripts, turned them in, and then you didn't see a lot of the show after that. Like, I'm curious about what your impressions were about watching the episodes and then seeing your episode, and what changed, what didn't, all that stuff. I mean,
it's funny because so I wrote episode 3, which has the Podling bath scene, and I remembered.
This is Vivian.
Yeah. Which was a fun scene. I was so happy when they assigned me that script. I was like, this is great. My first thing was, look, I gotta have a Podling butt in it, because how do we just do? And then the whole water of it all. I remember, again, I had never written for puppets. I don't even think I even understood what that meant. I just wrote a big scene with water, and people were splashing around in water and bubbles and just madness. And I do remember one of the notes came back from Henson that says, and I'm going to paraphrase, but it was something along the lines of like, water creates an unsurmountable problem for puppets. Like that they knew going into it was going to be a problem, because water and the actual puppets would be ruined. It became this whole thing we had to adjust. But as I watched episode 3 this weekend, I suddenly forgot how much of a mess that was going to be, like how hard it was. And I just watched and I was like, look how easy that looked. Even though I knew going into it was probably, again, I wasn't on set, but I'm sure it was just the most complicated way of doing it. But as a viewer watching it, I was just like, wow, they did it. They nailed it. That's amazing. And anyone who's there, I just, as I'm watching the series, and there was a lot of things that we ended up changing that I wasn't privy to. And I'm sure with like production stuff, and we had a lot of like grand fighting that was probably just too expensive. They had to take away, but we replaced it with other great action sequences and stuff that were probably more doable. And again, it's been 2 years since I was in that room, which is nuts. So I was watching as a viewer now, and I sort of kind of almost forgot some of the storylines and the plot. I just think it's such a testament of the people there and the craftsmanship and Louis and everybody who's there, who's able to do it in such a seamless way that, again, as an audience, I didn't see any of the difficulty that I knew for a fact there was difficulty when we were writing the script. So it's crazy. It's amazing. I'm just in awe of this whole process.
This is Jeff. So we did the Podling butt. We did 2 sculpts of that, funny enough. The first one didn't feel quite good enough, quite right for what Vivian had written. But like the answer to that of like what Vivian did was we used bubbles. There's not actually any water in that scene.
Oh, interesting.
But you have the visual of the bubbles, and bubbles were something we could create and interact with the puppets without ruining them.
Were
so if you look
real
closely,
bubbles
you'll
or
notice
CG
there's not
bubbles?
actually. They were real bubbles and some CG bubbles, but we had a bubble guy who came in and he had a unicorn hat on. And one morning I walked in, there's just a dude in a unicorn hat. We had a bubble wrangler. He was literally called the bubble guy or bubble man. And so that was how we were able to do that without actually using water.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I did not know that. That's awesome.
This is Margaret. To piggyback on what Vivian was saying, I got to see the premiere when they showed it at Comic-Con, and everyone from the team who was there in San Diego is like, "Oh my God, what do you think? How's it evolved?" And I'm like, "Guys, I haven't seen this episode since it was in Courier 12. Like, it's all like, this is the first film that I had seen of it, was on this huge screen with 6,500 of my closest friends." And usually when you work on a show, and frequently you're still working on it as it begins airing, and so at least for me, when I'm watching something like that, I'm seeing everything that's happening behind the scenes. I'm remembering everything that happened in the room. And in this case, as Vivian said, we've been off of this show. We turned in our scripts in summer 2017, and getting to watch it fresh for the first time on something that we had a hand in creating, that was really cool, and it was just amazing watching it. And I had to keep reminding myself, yeah, this is what we were doing that summer. This is what it turned into. It's crazy.
If I can just interject, it almost felt like, as I was watching it, like I was watching a dream. Like, I remember these scenes that I wrote, and every time when I watch them, I'm like, oh, that's right, I forgot that we talked about this, and we made sure to plant this so that it would pay off there. And so it was a weird parallel watching experience. Again, one of fresh eyes, and then one of, oh yeah, did I dream all this? That's right. So it was a weird, like, I've been down this road. Oh, I remember this. So it's such an interesting. It's right now. It's just an interesting experience for me.
Yeah, and as Jeff said, in production they had to make changes and things adjusted, and so it retains that dreamlike quality under the. It's like, okay, had I just forgotten how we structured that, or did they actually make that change once they got out there in London?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I can't imagine watching it as a viewer at home and remembering, like, oh wow, that was that Wednesday that we brought up Landstrider dung, and now that's that. Now that's
that was a Wednesday.
Someone made that, and it's steaming on the screen now. Whoever, I don't know if these were canon prior to this project or if this came up just for Age of Resistance, but the Crystal Singers are SETI eel level creepy to me, and the turn of the
Aratham in general, or the mind control one.
The particularly the mind control ones. Baby spiders overtaking an army was one of the best visuals I think I've ever seen in a fight. That was absolutely a stunning moment of the Ascendancy stepping forward and doing that, and then in a larger move to then twist the Aratham so that I was supporting these characters and was glad when they got a hug at the end. You literally made me root for the SETI eel larva somehow.
It's interesting because every time that we, this was an ongoing thing in the room, because we kept saying, well, Tavar can do this or Tavar can do that, and then Jolie would say, well, Tavar's a spider now, because that part of the mythology, originates in the book. So we had this piece of canon that we had to conform, and we really did try our best to conform the canon to what we were doing. I think in some cases there may be a little bit of fungibility, but so that was really a case of we were Will and Jeff, did you guys or the Aratham? When did the Aratham really sort of come up? Were they part of like the comic books before Joe, or are they strictly from the YA books?
This is Jeff. I don't know where they came from. I know they came to prominence in the YA books. I believe Joe named them and created them. For sure, probably the Crystal Singers. Yeah, I think the Crystal Singers Joe Lee came up with. And then if you look at like the Aratham and I always say them wrong, Aratham, we actually had to have a recording of it properly said for me when we were recording all the voices, because I would get it wrong. We actually recorded like 200 words that we could play back in the recording studio, because there's so many difficult terms that even I would get it wrong when I was there. But something like when you have those, that's a really good example of like, I believe those started in the Joe Lee, and he sort of created a lot of that iconography and a lot of that. And then we bring it through into the show and do the big turn of how they join with our heroes. And then the hug moment at the end was a thing that Louis had an idea on set, like a day or two before we shot it. So we just wrote that real quick and dropped it in. But that was kind of a pickup. That was a last minute thing. I think that was Louis' brain saying we just needed to cross that T with them a little bit harder. And also he was looking for a little more joy in that ending because it's a little bleak.
Yeah, I think I honestly believe that the spiders had, they were named sort of by their division, so they didn't have a full name until we came along. But these things blur. But I think it's a really good example of us being given a piece of canon that we had to reconcile, and then we were able to just sort of make a big thing out of it because we had it, so we played with it.
What would you all say was the hardest solve like that in the room, or most surprising, where you had a piece of canon that you went home on a Wednesday thinking, these are the rocks that this is going to dash upon. We aren't going to solve this, and then had a surprising move forward. Was there a tightest moment?
This is Jeff. I think the thing that we knocked our head against the most was Thra and her role in the books and where she had to be and what she had to do. Because she was Brea's sister, we wanted to include her more in the show, whereas characters like Naya and Gurjin, who are a big part in the books, we could kind of dip in and out of them and then let them go off and have their adventures. But Thra was emotionally bonded to Brea. And so I don't know that there was an aha moment so much as 100 little moments, if that makes sense. I don't know that there was like a big one that we bashed against. It was only ever a question of like, what's the best way to get from B? But I'm not sure that there was ever like, this part of the canon is killing us. Does anybody else remember anything different? Is that crazy?
I remember Thra. Right. A lot of it was Thra. I remember the timeline where Thra was, what she was doing, and if it matched with what was currently we were writing towards. And what was great about having Jolie in the room was not only was he, his brain, which he knew exactly where the timeline was and what everyone was doing at that moment off screen, but what he was also able to do was he was able to kind of step back and be like, okay, we can probably, this could probably work. Like he wasn't so, even though these were his books, he wasn't so rigid with the timeline, rigid with everything. He would be able to be like, okay, whatever the story needed for our version of the story that needed, he's like, I can work with that. Like we would always look to him going, can we do this? Is this too much out of the, are we going a little bit too off the rails? And he'd be like, no, if we pull back this way, I can make this work in the books. Because I think at that point he was writing the next book too. So he was trying to it was great working with him in the room. Yeah, he was working, he was writing the next book. So he was trying to make sure that it would work in the next books too.
Yeah, didn't he wind up having to rewrite or replot a chunk of one of the books because of something that happened on the show?
This is Jeff. He did a lot of replotting for us. He was very gracious. He did some replotting for us, for sure. Because there was a point where the momentum of the show was setting big things, and he started to have to adjust around us. Whereas we had adjusted around him more in the beginning. As he was still writing, it kind of had to tilt a little bit the other way. And so he was very, very gracious because we were like, we just kind of need this for emotional reasons in this point in the story. So he was sort of serving two brains at once. And it was a testament to him that he could do that. I hear somebody's child in the background as well.
Kids these days, I know.
He wants to be on the podcast.
I think Jeff.
I know, Mommy's working. Mommy's working.
Well, honestly, I know how many of you. We had for the actual interview portion. This show is so long. This process was so long. People had children and babies, and those babies are now children over the course of this production. So a number of you could be the one who has a child in the background.
You don't know.
Viv, you were 3 months?
I was
3 months in.
I was 3 months pregnant when I started the gig, and now my son's 2 years old when we premiered. So
yeah. My daughter had turned 1 when I got the gig, and then she just turned 3. She's 3.5 now. And then I had a son 3 weeks ago who was conceived during this whole process. So yeah, it's a lot.
But I'll tell you this in terms of difficulties. Not canon, but I remember breaking episode 5 was the hardest, and writing episode 10. Those were particularly tricky.
Because of the plot inherent in 5, or just the position of it in the total story?
This is Jeff. It was because of the amount of plotting. It was everybody comes together in there. So everybody had to line up and be dream fasting. And there was a number of different ways you could go through that. And so there was versions of the episode there was one version that was much more almost farcical, where everybody is in the castle, sort of just missing each other. So it was just a lot of different pieces to get everybody into that room. And then once you're into that room within the dream space, it's a huge exposition drop. And you've also got characters who know each other but are meeting for the first time, and how much of that do you hit or not hit? So it was a very complicated episode. And then 10 wasn't the plotting as much, was just the details. Just when you have a battle, when you have all these different pieces coming together, it's very technical. It's very much trying to make sure the beats are clear and that the whole thing doesn't just become a schmear of a battle.
Yeah, it's Javi. For episode 10, I think one of the things that is always a challenge when you're writing these big action sequences is that they do, a good action sequence isn't just people fighting. A good action sequence is drama. It has punches and swords instead of dialogue. So you're constantly looking for what are the characters' arcs leading them to, and trying to figure out how to get there through action instead of through words. And just getting that final battle scene to where we were for our read through for Netflix before this even went into production was a bear. It was a tough one just because and also you're trying to, the Skeksis are big and they are imposing, and the Gelfling are little and they're not, and just having that battle turn out to sort of not seem too stacked from one side or the other was a tough thing.
And also, this is Jeff. We all had fears of, and it's a loving fear of Kermit the Frog doing his sword fight in Muppet Treasure Island. Was about the basis of what we had as an example to work from, and it would not work for our show. Yeah. So it's extraordinarily technical. Everything is a special rig in there. Everything had to be really tightly thought of, really have a good reason. If you have even something like, I don't know how much spoilers you're giving away, but let's say there's a Skeksy and Rianne is fighting him, and his sword digs into the ground and pushes like a trowel, and Rianne scurries back. That scurry back was an entirely special rig that we weren't sure it would work, and took a lot of planning and a lot of time.
Yeah, that's a fantastic scene, and visually, I can tell what you mean. That's one of the magic moments in the series and in the film, is that you forget in that change that the puppet you were watching can't really do this, and that's when you know that it's true, that disbelief is suspended. I was watching that character, and of course he can do both those moves.
Right, and it's like him standing to falling to crawling backwards to flipping to jumping forward. I think that's like 5 or 6 different Riannes, different rigs, different shot, different tricks. And it's all in one, 10-second sequence?
Yeah.
So you have to, it takes a lot of planning. It's really, that's Louis. That's Louis and the team. It's amazing. I
had a moment in episode 1 that was when I knew I was hooked, the same as the original movie. The Landstriders run kind of over the top of the camera, and you see, I think, 2 or 3 of them run past with the camera going between the legs of them, basically. And my jaw fell open. It was as magical as when I was a kid, seeing Landstriders for the first time, just updated. What occurred to me is that it looked as good as I remembered the original movie looking. Were there moments for y'all, having written it, but getting to see it now, have there been moments so far that really jumped out at you of what you've gotten to see of it? That wow, that is magical. I forget I worked on that.
What was your experience, Margaret?
It's interesting because, as soon as you ask that question, I'm racking my memory saying, what are those moments? And a lot of the ones that leap to mind are little ones, like Rianne and it's Rhiannon Deet lighting the fire, and the bit where you see the spark fly from the flint into the fire, and the fire starts. And I know that there was a whole thing, and like there was a wire and a thing, and then poof, and then the fire goes. But it's just like, holy crap! Puppets just did that. I thought that because I remember being there in the meetings where we were talking about when they get to the circle of the suns with the heretic and the wanderer, and the script is describing there's going to be this puppet show, and they're moving the figures around to illustrate the history of Thra. And I just remember we're there in the notes meeting, and Rita sort of looks down the table at the writers, and she's like, you do realize that close-ups of a puppet's hand are usually not a great thing for us.
Oh, I forgot about that. That's right.
and it's like, no, this is, and it'll be all in close-up, and you can go, and it can be a thing in the glove, and, and we worked at it, but it just turned out beautifully between the shadows and meeting Barnaby, who I know did some of that handwork for that sequence. It was just like, holy crap, that's amazing how it all came together.
This is Vivian. So we watched the episode where the hunter kills Rand's dad, Orden, and that whole fight sequence, Jesus, it's like I was watching it. It's one thing you have, two puppets fighting. There were three puppets, and there was this, but you felt the intensity. I remember watching that, and I literally just watched it 2 days ago, and I just turned to my husband and went, holy crap, it was so well done. It was just the acting, the way, I can't even, and we just started, my husband and I just kept going back and forth going, I wonder how Louis did it. Did he have pause? How many cameras? We just started, being so in awe of just that sequence, which we've seen, you see action sequence all the time. And, we are to a point where I think as viewers, you sort of kind of get the broad strokes of how that works, the choreography, the stunts, where the cameras are. But in this case, I was just but there's 4 people that control one puppet. So if there are 3, I literally was just how does that work? How does anyone even fit? And it was just so well done that I am so in awe of everybody who did it to make that sequence so seamless that it didn't take us out of it until you're done with the episode, and then you go, I don't know how they. Then you start trying to piece it together and going, I don't even know how that even works. So that was I remember that was a really impressive scene.
Yeah, I felt like when I first watched Wallace and Gromit, I know it's claymation. I know how that works roughly, and I still can't figure out how they did some of that. Yeah.
This is Javi. One of the things that I marvel at watching this over and over, the many times I've seen it and all that, and it's just, and it's not any one thing. It is just that this show is so weird, and I think, Les, you did a deep dive into The Middleman, so you know how much I love weird. But, there were so many days in the writer's room where, we kind of marveled at how weird the show is being allowed to be. So we wrote these scripts that were weird, and we figured, well, and then when you put in the imaginations of the puppeteers and the scenic designers and the production design and all that, the show is, batshit crazy. And it's one of those things where I cannot, it goes on, my wife and I we're watching it with my in-laws, and I just kept looking at it going, I can't believe this even exists. To sit around and say, well, what moment was weird or what moment was impressive or this or that. It's almost to cheapen the fact that the mere existence of this thing is kind of boggles the imagination, really,
Yeah, I think it might have been either Will or Jeff in the behind the scenes. Someone mentioned that it's not like these are characters acting in front of a white background. These are characters acting in front of the lushest set I've ever seen built for puppets, or one of the lushest sets I've ever seen built for any genre production.
Right.
And they've got to hold my attention when the background is not helping them. I mean, the background looks, frankly, more real than a lot of live action movies I go see.
Yeah, I mean, the level of detail is ridiculous, and there's so many Easter eggs. Everybody was hiding Easter eggs. Everybody was adding a little flourish. Everybody was adding a little bit of love, a little weird thing that they loved in there. I'm proud of how many 80s fantasy movie references are in this show. There is a story that the women who did the braids on the sisters put into the braids to talk about the characters and their hierarchy and where they were and are. There's little details in the Stone in the Wood set, like a laundry line with tiny little Gelfling-sized clothes on them, right? And each one of those clothes is like handmade and stitched, and that's phenomenal. So there's all these places you look, the show is just bursting with life, and that's everybody putting in little bits of what they love.
Can I add my favorite set detail? This is Margaret.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw Bobbin's toy Nurlock, I just about died. That is the cutest thing ever. Like, oh, it has a toy Nurlock. That's so adorable.
I tend to watch everything with subtitles, and I was glad I did, because I noticed Griot's lexicon of lesser astrography, which if I'm translating that makes you map to the stars Javi.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Exactly.
There's also there's Durkin's Guide to Sun Delirium or something.
Mm-hmm.
Durkin's Delirium, Book of Delirium. Yeah. I turned to my husband. I'm like, "That's your last name. Look what I just did." He's like, "Great, thanks." He's like, "This is awesome."
And
Jeff tells the story better than I do, so I would, if you want to pick it up, please do. But the scientist has a fake eye, and that eye back in the day was made from a die-cast TIE fighter toy, and apparently the people who were in charge of that character went to eBay and found that die-cast toy new in box, and were able to replicate the eye completely how it was. But Jeff, you said that there was actually a really expensive line item in the budget because it's a collector's item now, right?
I can't imagine how much they spent. And they were just like, it was a lot, but it was worth it. I never got a clear answer, so maybe the department didn't want to say, or maybe they were moving some money around and it was cheap. But they literally got, the same exact die-cast model still in its packaging, and then took it out and ripped it apart and made it into the scientist's eye, which is pretty amazing.
That's so great.
So we were replicating 37-year-old inside jokes.
Yeah.
And then you've got the little crawlies that crawl around on the ground in the Crystal Castle. They went and got the same exact toys, little wind-ups that they used in the original film. That company was still going.
Wow.
And and they are the same thing. They're the same exact toys with a bit of fur on the back, which is why you'll notice you never see them too much in close-up. They're usually in silhouette. They're literally just little plastic things with a bit of fur on the back.
Wow.
That's so great.
Crazy.
That's nuts. I'm picturing somebody at that company, someday they're going to want these wind-up toys again. And we're going to be ready, people.
We just got to hang on.
Hey, Jeff, can I ask, I don't know if we're allowed to talk about this, but I remember when you were in England and you were shooting and you would send little tidbits to us writers about what's going on. And that one thing, because I have such a morbid personality, that I would remember how you would talk about how, yes, these puppets are magical and it's great, but when they start to break down the horror show that happens.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, I remember you tell us things about this, and I would just be like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." Or at night, I'll have you talk about it, when they store the puppets at night and how creepy that was.
Well, they would break and things would go wrong, but that would mean that suddenly they'd be talking and they'd be doing a dramatic scene, and then the eyes would just start twitching, and you were like, "Oh, Rianne's having a stroke," but Rianne's not real and Rianne can't be. But it would also ears fell off a lot, so they would be doing a scene and then the ear would just kind of fall off, and the puppeteers, being the puppeteers, would kind of stay in the scene, but they know that the footage is not usable now, but they would start joking as if they were actors having problems. So our blooper reel, I hope it gets released someday, and I got to show it to all you guys when we're together. The blooper reel, I think, is one of the funniest things you've ever seen, because it's just Skeksis getting caught in things and Gelfling ears falling off. And I don't know how much of this they want me to say, but it's so funny. It is so funny. Just how many things can go wrong when every shot is a creature effects shot.
crazy.
You know, Jeff, and apropos of what you said, now I understand why Rianne kept complaining about smelling toast.
You know, I remember there was one specifically of the moment, and I guess we're getting into spoilers here, right? Because the show's out.
The show's out, yeah. That's
the end of episode 5. I won't go too specific. There's a big dramatic moment where Skeksis has a sword and turns and does this big cut that sort of changes the whole course of the show. And watching him get caught in the curtains every time was amazing, because the puppeteer would be acting his heart out in this big sword. You know, then you are Noah, and turn and just be completely wrapped in the curtains almost every time. Was amazing. And then you'd have to cut and go back and pull them off. It was pretty good. We also discovered the joys of puppet throwing, which is deeply satisfying. But yeah, so it was a fun shoot. It was a long shoot, the longest shoot Netflix has ever had. I remember the day that they came to us and it was like, "Congratulations, you just beat out The Crown." And I was like, "Oh, good for us, yay!" It's time consuming.
Are there any plans for another season of this or a different Dark Crystal project?
I think right now the focus is let's see how the world takes this season. We have a document for season 2. We want to go back. I hope everybody who worked on it would want to go back. But we're just waiting to see that the desire is there. It's a crazy thing to put out 10 hours without a single human in it.
Yeah,
that's live action. We got to see how people take that in and see if the desire is there. But I mean, I know I speak for at least myself when I say, I want to go back. And then beyond that, I think because this is such a long process, right now the focus is let's finish this story and then let's see where it goes from there.
Yeah.
But there will be some new comics coming out in the fall that are related to the show. I think there's going to be toys and stuff. So there'll be, there's always more Dark Crystal material. But in terms of the show, it's really up to the audience to see if we get to do a second season.
And also, when Will and Jeff first crafted the story for the season, that story wound up being cut in half. So there is an entire, because we looked at it and just the sheer density of narrative material that they had created. So, and we have also worked out between ourselves based on that material and then everything that we learned in season 1, what that's going to be. So we know what the story is. We're ready to, and we're ready to go, Well,
hopefully you get the shot and everybody loves it as much as I just did. That's a lot of puppets I saw in a weekend, and yeah, I'm still kind of giddy from it. I can't thank you all enough.
You literally just sat the whole time. I mean, like, how many episodes did you watch a day? I'm very curious about how people are binging this.
So let's see. Friday, I had to drive 6 hours, so I didn't get to watch as much of it. So okay. I woke up Saturday morning. I watched the behind the scenes on Friday, and then Saturday morning I watched the first 4.
Jeez. Okay.
Yeah. Then yesterday, I finished it out.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Wow.
Fan.
Yep.
I had watched the original movie, maybe 3 weeks ago, just kind of in prep, and had forgotten how many long, luxuriating shots there are of just Thra. And then when I watched the series now, I loved how much of that was mined for great effect, whether comedic or dramatic in the series now. But I had honestly forgotten how much the Urskeks scared the crap out of me as a kid. I don't know why. I recognized that the Skeksis were evil, but I felt like I understood as a kid how to handle them. Like, they are obviously bad. Don't trust them. And then I really loved the Mystics, and there was something there was some kind of distrust of, like, I don't know what Urskeks might do in a given situation that made me feel uncertain and unsafe as a kid. And so the Dark Crystal, I think, stuck with me partly because the resolution at the end of the movie actually made the thing that freaked me out most.
The happy ending for you brings back the thing that scares you the most.
A little bit.
And then they fly up into the stars, and you're like, well, now they could be anywhere.
Right?
There are aliens who could just teleport. Let's be clear. Let's break down what the Dark Crystal movie is. And I love this movie deeply. But it's set on an alien world about aliens who come to an alien world split into two different species when they break a magic crystal, and then 1,000 years or 2,000 years pass, and then the movie starts.
Yes.
That is bonkers.
Yes, they break the core of the planet.
They break a magic crystal that happens to be symbiotic with the entire planet while simultaneously being the soul of this crone wizard.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're like, so the start of the movie is, here's a bunch of new things. Two of them used to be one thing. We're not even showing you that till the end. I mean, the bravery of that movie is insane. Just the narrative leap that they would make and trust the audience to go with them is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. I think it's braver than probably anything we did on this show, because we went and said, okay, let's fill in this world. Let's make it make sense. And there was things that we talked about a lot. Like I really wanted to understand better the crystal and the way that works. Why does the crystal drain from creatures? Mm-hmm. I thought the crystal was good. Why does it drain from, even in the movie, from creatures? And so one of the things we talked about was that they created this thing of they reverse basically the polarity of the crystal and make it pull in essence. Okay, but then why does that essence go through a tube and they collect it? So then we see in the movie him sort of flip the breakers and put in the syringes and have that suction that pulls that essence that the crystal is trying to pull in. So like that was the stuff that we did. We filled in. And a lot of that comes from logic, right? Of just trying to understand how that works. And so those become visuals in the show. You see the moment that they put the syringes into her as this very powerful, very invasive, very terrifying moment. And I remember seeing those syringes and thinking, God, they're huge. But that's where it comes from. It comes from a place of logic, of trying to fill that in, of trying to say, here's how we understand what they were doing in the movie.
Does anybody know when the choice was made for the Tuvan throat singing for the opera?
Jeff,
that's
late. You and Will, right?
That was fantastic.
Yeah, that was definitely not a real thing.
That's a fantastic choice.
That was a really interesting production challenge, and Jeff and Will very cleverly came up with that bit with the opera as a stand-in. Originally, that story was that the Wonder and the Heretic both shared a peg leg, and they kept stealing it from each other, and the peg leg was missing. And that they actually weren't talking to each other because they each accused the other of stealing the peg leg. And then, like, the Gelfling had to either find the peg leg or build them a new one, and that's how they got them to tell them the secret. And when we got to set, it was one of those things where, like, doing a peg leg, like, already the Mystic is, like, the most punishing operating position of any puppet ever. Like, the Mystic is really difficult to operate, and the Skeksis are no picnic either. And it was one of those things where, like, it just came back to us, like, are you kidding? And now you want to give them both a fake leg? So the opera was the thing that replaced the sort of other lark that was in there. And I think it plays really wonderfully. So thank you guys for making me look good.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you. I mean, it was sad that we had to change it, and it was partially the peg leg, but also it was really time. So this is like how you get into how you manage time on a production, particularly of this scale. To get very detailed and nitty-gritty, the last set that we shot in was the Circle of the Suns. And we did that on purpose because we knew that story-wise that was a cul-de-sac, right? Meaning that the heroes enter into that space and then they leave. And it's largely the same. When they leave, they're on the same quest. So we knew that we could tighten story within that as much as we needed to. So we left that as sort of a thing to see how much schedule and time we had. Then we had two sort of pieces. We had building the peg leg and them doing the puppet show. And both of those, when it comes to puppets, are extremely time-consuming in terms of the details, right? In terms of the rigs. Picking things up is the hardest thing. And we created two extraordinarily difficult sequences. So then the question became, okay, if you're going to spend the time, where do you want to put that time? And the answer was the puppet show. Let's make that puppet show as amazing as possible. And that came out of the room and out of Javi's script. And so then you tweak beginning-wise and say, okay, so we're going to need to simplify this quite a bit beforehand. And the opera came along because we knew we needed a time jump of our heroes come in. We needed two time jumps in there to build within the narrative structure of the show. So we couldn't just have go wait in there and then the show starts and then the show finishes. We needed a break of something that happened And then the puppet show started. And so that's where the opera came from. We needed a thing that we could do a quick joke, cut away for a while, and then come back, and that ends. And then they say, okay, now the real show begins. So a lot of that sequence in 7 was about using the amazing stuff that Javi had written, and then just trying to get in there and make sure that we're using the resources as well as we can. And then you look at something like what Javi wrote in that episode, like Stone in the Wood, the attack of the crystal, the spiders. That sequence is almost untouched from the original draft that Javi wrote, which I hope somebody publishes someday, because I think it's one of the best pieces of writing ever, of that attack. Oh, wow. And so that's a good example of two sequences within the same thing. They're both beautifully written, and just why we start to change things over here. It's not because it's not right. It's because how do we want to use the time and the money? That's the fun inside stuff of the Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, puppet.
But you know what, Jeff? I think that's really important, because it's like what people don't realize about the work that we do, whether it's with puppets or what have you, is that our two biggest enemies are time and money. You know, given unlimited time and unlimited money, we can do anything pretty much. And I'm sure the Creature Shop could accomplish anything. But, you know, we already shot this thing for 10 months and at a handsome amount of money even for Netflix. So, you know, those compromises are there. And I think a big part of the job that you and Will did so well and so masterfully over the course of production was to navigate those compromises without having the show look like it compromised, you know?
And without ever trying to take away from what the writers had done, right? It's not a thing of like, we have amazing writers and they crafted beautiful things. And then sometimes you have to tweak it. Sometimes you have to add, like in episode 3 with Vivian with the Dowdrin. He continues talking underneath the scene that Vivian wrote. So I had to write a monologue for him that nobody was ever going to hear unless you had a Dolby Atmos sound mix and turned up the back speaker. But he has a whole monologue about his childhood. But that's because I'm filling in what Vivian wrote, if that makes sense. That's always trying to honor what she did.
And, you know, sometimes these limitations actually help the story because they can force you to come up with a creative solution. So in terms of how long it takes to build puppets, you'll notice that there are characters who come in late, like, the hunter is not until episode 4. The ornamentalist is not until episode 4. And so the puppets just weren't going to be ready in time. So now you have to come up with a story reason why that character wasn't there and now is there. And that's pretty fun. And solving that, now you're getting some more backgrounds to those characters that you wouldn't be forced to come up with otherwise. And I think it makes the ornamentalist entrance better because now it's an entrance. And she could really run with that.
Well, I definitely think y'all rose to this challenge. I watched all of it really quickly and enjoyed it. And I'm sure I'll get to go back through various episodes as all my friends watch it in a reasonable amount of time. I can't thank all of you enough. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Thank you for
Thanks for having us.
Y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
The TV Dudes is an independently run podcast and a member of the Electric Sweater Podcast Network. We are exclusively listener supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/TVDudes. You can like us on Facebook and Twitter @TVDudes. All the music for our show is by our friend and original TV Dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith. To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com and electricsweater.com. I'm Grant Davis. Thanks for listening.